What's happening, Packer fans? Welcome back to an all-new episode of the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. I am super excited to be joined once again by the one and only Carmen Vitali. You can find her on Fox Sports as the NFC North expert. Of course, more importantly, you can find her on the Pack a Day podcast as the NFC North expert. You can find her on Twitter at CarmieV. That is CARMIE with a V. Carmen, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing great. Getting ready and geared up to go to Vegas to see the Green Bay Packers. I'm so excited.
You get to see Packers Raiders. I'm very jealous. I thought on and off, should I go to Vegas? Should I not go to Vegas? I ultimately decided not to. I'm now having fear of missing out, which is going to happen. But what is your Vegas plan as you get ready for Packers Lions?
Honestly, I'm going in on Monday, the day of the game, like in the morning, and only staying for the night. Weirdly enough, I'm obviously covering these teams. Fox does pay for my travel, but we do have caps on how much we can spend, and everything was so expensive in Vegas this weekend. And I was like, why? What's going on? Is there a fight? Like, Raiders games don't really move the needle like they do in other cities because Vegas is very well equipped to handle big events, obviously. And then I realized it's Packers fans. Packers fans are going to take over Allegiant Stadium. Like, mark my words. I know it's going to happen. Vegas is a wonderful destination for Packer fans. And I'm like, that's why everything is sold out and so expensive. Like, I'm staying off the strip. I'm only going for the night. I'm like, this is not Vegas that I'm used to. But I mean, more power to Green Bay Packers and their fans because they travel really well.
You are not the only person that I've heard this from. I've heard multiple people who have had to stay off the strip because of the crazy prices with the Packers in town. And like you said earlier, I didn't know if maybe there was something else going on as well, but we know Packer fans travel. We know it's Vegas. And I've been saying all week, like, yeah, it might be in Vegas, but this is not going to feel like a traditional road game for the Packers, especially coming off Thursday night football. They'll have plenty of rest. It's not like the travel is going to like zap them in by any means. In fact, the Raiders are coming off a road game the previous week, playing at the Chargers. So if anything, the Packers should be more well rested. They should have, potentially maybe even more fans in the stands. Like, this is not your traditional road game for Green Bay.
No, not at all. I mean, like you said, they travel so well. Even my 6 years with the Buccaneers, the Packers came down a couple of times. And when I say that stadium was majority green and gold, it was majority green and gold. Honestly, all of the NFC North teams travel really well when it has to do with a warm climate. They all want to get out of their cold.
Speaking of which,
the weather's beautiful in Wisconsin.
Not necessarily a warm climate, although it was really great last Thursday night. The Lions fans traveled pretty darn well to Lambeau Field. That was probably the most road team colors that I've ever seen at Lambeau Field in my multiple years of being at that stadium. So that was crazy to see. But I want to start there. I know it's over a week ago already. It feels like forever. But your takeaway from Packers Lions, I think the Lions sort of announced themselves as like, yep, we are the top dog in this division. But what was sort of your overarching takeaways from that game?
Yeah, it was about bouncing back also from like the loss earlier in the season. They were kind of stumbling along, and that really secured their position as, no, we're a complete team. We're the team to beat. I also think that playing a division team played a lot into that because of the fact that these teams are so familiar with each other, and they have game plans against each other that are specific to certain players on each team. I mean, like these teams are very, very familiar. So I think that also helped in the Lions case, maybe not necessarily in the Packers case, unfortunately. But no, I've been saying that they're the team to beat in the NFC North, and they absolutely proved that on a national scale on Thursday night. So I think that's another reason you're seeing all of these people kind of talk about the Lions now, where maybe they weren't before. It's like, well, this was a national game, and it's the second one they played in 4 weeks too, and they played well on the national level each time. So I can't say enough about what Dan Campbell has done in Detroit and the culture and just the team bonding that they have. That's really manifesting itself in really good play on the field.
I was just about to say, you don't want to play the Detroit Lions on Thursday. That's their day, apparently. Unfortunately, Green Bay plays Detroit again on Thursday on Thanksgiving later this season. So the Lions have won 4 straight against Green Bay. They knocked them out of the playoffs in Week 18 last year in Aaron Rodgers' last game as a Green Bay Packer. Spoiled that game. They now, going into this game, I think we sort of knew like this is for maybe not the NFC North crown. A lot can happen from here on out, but this is for the early lead in the NFC North, if nothing else, and certainly bragging rights for the first 4 weeks of the season. But this game was not close. Sometimes you get those Thursday night games, especially on the road, and the road team's just so behind the 8 ball in a short week, and you see some home team craziness happen from time to time. This had none of that. And I think to your point, this probably had something to do with these two teams being familiar with each other. We know, again, the Lions have had recent success against the Packers, but this was a pretty big beatdown from beginning to end. And my question then for you is, we know that they're probably the NFC North, not only the team to beat, but by far the favorites at this point. Are they also contenders? I know you kind of wrote about this a little bit as well, but is this a contending team?
Yeah, it is. It's so weird to say, but
It is.
I think the way that they're able to bounce back from losses and the way that they're able to play 4 quarters of football, that's not as common in this league as it's made out to be. I mean, it's hard to play 60 minutes of good, solid football, and the Lions have been able to do that, win or lose for that matter. And I think that they are complete, they are deep in the right spots. And I mean, you've seen that their offensive line is a little bit banged up, but you have guys that you can plug and play right away in there. And that makes a huge difference. I think Ben Johnson understands, and so does Brad Holmes for that matter, their GM, understands the importance of solidifying that offensive line no matter what happens, because that's what makes that offensive engine go. And the defense, I can't say enough about what Aaron Glenn has done with so many young players and the way that they keep getting this production out of first and second year players. You got Aiden Hutchinson leading the league in pressures, and you have rookies like Jack Campbell flying all over the place. It's something Aaron Glenn said to me before the season started that really stuck out to me, was that they view Jack Campbell as their middle linebacker for the next 10 to 12 years. And that kind of makes a lot of sense when you think about where he was taken and kind of the eyebrows that were raised for taking an inside linebacker so high. But when you think about the fact that they view him as a defensive cornerstone, and then you see him go out there and not get the gaudy stats yet, but the way that he plays, the athleticism he exhibits, and just the way he hits, man. I mean, he is like one of those old school, I'm from Chicago, grew up in Chicago. He like reminds me of guys like Urlacher and Briggs, who were extremely athletic. They were extremely aware of what was going on around them, where the ball was, all that stuff, but they could also just come downhill and hit. And that's Jack Campbell. And he fits in with Dan Campbell and the rest of the guys there real well.
The Detroit Fighting Campbells. It's just hitting me now that I'm wearing way too much of a Detroit Lions blue, and then now I'm very uncomfortable. I know.
It's almost Honolulu blue.
Mistakes were made.
I'm wearing gold right now. It's not Packers gold,
right.
But it's Arizona State gold.
It was needed. But no, it's interesting because they're two very different philosophies that Green Bay and Detroit took in this draft. And they're at two different wavelengths for where they're at from a team building standpoint. And Green Bay's, I know a lot of people don't like that rebuild word, but they went super young. They're the youngest team in the NFL. They went in more like high-end development down the road. Detroit attacked what I think a lot of people will now consider some of the fringe positions: running back, tight end, safety, and linebacker.
Inside linebacker, right? Yep.
And linebacker. Like, those are the four of like, those are the non-premium positions. You don't need to spend premium picks on it. But they got 4 guys who, as we have seen, are ready to play right freaking now and have had a huge impact on their season already. You know, Jahmyr Gibbs, I think a lot of people are looking for even more out of Jahmyr Gibbs and just a little bit more playing time. But obviously that 1-2 with Montgomery's been working pretty darn well so far. You know, Brian Branch has been flying around. You just mentioned all the great things about Jack Campbell. And then, you know, Laporta coming up with that big third down early in the game. Like, my goodness, like, those are 4 guys that are ready to play right now, that had the college pedigree, that played at big time schools and were ready to come in and contribute. And they have. And that, to me, you look at the drafts for some of the other teams, obviously Jordan Addison playing well in Minnesota, Darnell Wright playing well with Chicago, but Detroit didn't have, it's not like they had, you know, just like the first pick in the draft like Chicago did, but they utilized it. They went with some of those fringe positions, but they got guys that could help them right now. And it's a huge reason why, in my opinion, they are on top of the NFC North and at 3-1, and again, potentially being in that contender status.
The way that they are able to turn around guys and get them acclimated to the league so quickly, I also think that has a lot to do with the fact that they have so many former players on their coaching staff, and they can relate to these guys and kind of show them the way by example without taking up roster spots. Usually you bring in like some veterans and stuff to show the younger guys the way that act as like player coaches. I'm thinking about Mercedes Lewis in Chicago right now, kind of brought in for that reason as well as to block. But you don't need to do that when you have coaches that aren't really that far removed from playing. And it just, again, it breeds this culture there that you can step up right away. You can step in right away. We're expecting you to do that because we believe in you. That's the message to these young guys, and it's paying off. I mean, yeah, I talked a lot about Jack Campbell. I didn't even get to Brian Branch, who looks to be the steal of the draft at this point, because how he got to the second round is incredible given the Swiss Army capabilities that he has and what he's doing for that backfield, that defensive backfield. And Sam Laporta is resetting almost every rookie tight end record already through the first 4 games. He's on pace and has the most yards of I think he has the most yards of any tight end in the league right now, not even just rookies. Wow. So he's just completely on fire, and he's a rare breed of tight end where in college, these guys are being treated more and more like big-bodied receivers, and they're not kind of learning that all-around being an extension of the offensive line, being able to block type schemes. Iowa is not like that. Iowa churns out these combo tight ends that, you know, they got rid of TJ Hawkinson. They just slotted in another Iowa tight end because they know that these guys are being taught the pro game in its entirety in college. And that's what's allowing Sam Laporta to make this transition look so seamless. But yeah, I mean, not only do you have contender right now, because all of your guys are so young, this is a very interesting and sustainable way to build a team for long-term success. So the biggest question mark right now is how long you hang on to Jared Goff, I think, because you have pretty much everything else solidified and locked up for years to come at this point.
And we'll see if they run into that same wall that sort of the Rams ran into, right, with Goff, where he might be able to get you there, but can he win you the Super Bowl? Right. And they decided they needed to go with, ironically enough, a Detroit
Lions quarterback,
Matthew Stafford, to get over that hump. They did. And, you know, Jared Goff is sort of the exact quarterback where you're like, all right, we can win with this guy, but you're always looking for that next upgrade. And that's probably the situation that they're in, where if they get the opportunity to go and find that next quarterback that they think can give them just a little bit of a better chance, so be it. But I feel like I'm in the total upside down, because probably for the first time in my life, the Detroit Lions are the ones that are on top of the division, doing things the right way. Like it's not like they just got a Kelvin Johnson or a Barry Sanders, like a generational player, and like they kind of carried them to some wins. This is a really well-built, it feels so weird to say, a very well-built Detroit Lions team with good coaching, with really smart coordinators. They're doing things like the right way in the trenches. They're doing right things from like an analytical play calling standpoint. Like it's crazy. I miss Matt Millen. I miss Matt Millen and his GM of the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, trust me. Again, growing up in Chicago, I never took the Lions seriously at all. And I think I still had some trepidation, even going into the season, even the way they ended last year with knocking the Packers out of the playoffs and playing out of spite, which was hysterical from an outsider's perspective. I guess that's not funny.
No, it is.
Packers fans. But I was still a little skeptical because I'm like, okay, but this is the Lions. Like, just let's keep remembering this is the Lions. And even in the game against Green Bay last Thursday, in that second half, when they came back out and Jordan Love kind of started to get some things going, and I was like, I even tweeted it. I was like, I was going to write ahead at halftime, but then I remembered this is the Lions and this is the Packers, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to wait. And I waited, and there was maybe 1 or 2 drives where you were like, okay, is Green Bay going to get back in this thing? Is the momentum shifting a little bit? And it did, but the Lions outlasted them. And I was like, nope. And this is where, I said before, they're playing 4 quarters of football every game now. And that is where that was a perfect prime example of the fact that the Lions are able to finish games. And these are not the Lions that we're used to growing up anymore.
No, not at all. And that was my take on it going in. It's like the Lions were the clear favorites going into the season for the NFC North. But I'm like, my entire life, every single time the Lions take 1 step forward, they take 2 steps back. So it's like It's like, I think they're going to be, but my whole entire history tells me they're probably going to find some way to go. And then you have like the gambling stuff immediately, and Jamison Williams gets suspended, and players. And
I
I'm
know.
like,
I was like, oh, here we go. Here
we
it is.
go. Like
This
this
is
just same old
Lions.
Detroit Lions. It's like 2 more steps back, and no, it has not been that. And kudos to them; they've done a phenomenal job. But then my follow up, as you look at this, as you look at this Packers team from like more of a national level and covering the NFC North. Where does this leave Green Bay moving forward? Because they've had really 9 quarters. If you go to the 4th quarter of the Atlanta game, 3 of the 4 quarters against the Saints, and then 4 quarters against the Lions that were very disjointed. And this looked like a not so great Packer team for the majority of those 9 quarters.
They're a young team. That's kind of what I see when I watch this team and thinking about how the team is constructed. But I actually did a piece last week about Green Bay's team building strategies and how they are the same and they've remained the same since Vince Lombardi days, since the 1960s. This is how this team has been constructed, where you bring in a quarterback, you let him grow with young receivers. It's not just a quarterback succession system. It's a team building system in general that includes skill players. And that's what you're seeing. And I think, when Matt LaFleur got here and Aaron Rodgers was in his prime, multiple MVPs, just future Hall of Famer, he had a lot of sway over how this team was ran and who was on the team and the roster construction and everything like that. Matt LaFleur didn't know any other way when he came in. And I think what's so fun to me, and I know that Green Bay has struggled a little bit throughout this season, but it seems like Matt LaFleur is now bought into the historical system that Green Bay has instilled, again, since the Lombardi years, the Lombardi way, if you will. Because even I believe it was right after Rodgers was traded, there was a press conference with Matt LaFleur who said, I still think we could use a veteran wide receiver. And that to me was like, okay, I feel like he's a little skeptical of how this can work. But if you go back to Aaron Rodgers' first couple of years as a starter, you have Jordy Nelson in there and learning along with him, even Brett Favre. You have Sterling Sharp, Shannon's brother, Sterling Sharp, and you have Antonio Freeman, who was a rookie at that point when Favre, I believe it was 94, 95. He was a relative unknown, and Robert Brooks. You have those guys that are with Sterling Sharp going out in with that neck injury. You had these 2 guys that were complete unknowns, and Favre had to kind of elevate his play, and it turned out for the better. I think 2 years later, Robert Brooks led the league in receiving yards, or maybe that was Antonio Freeman. I forget which one it was. But then, and then Aaron Rodgers does the same thing. They were trying to get Aaron Rodgers to do it again. And Aaron Rodgers didn't want to do it with Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs. He was done with that. So now it's Jordan Love's turn. And to see these guys grow together and to have Green Bay as a franchise give them the opportunity to do that, even when it looks disjointed, even when it looks a little bit inconsistent, they know that that's going to pay off in the long run because they've seen it pay off in the long run for decades at this point. So I'm not worried about the Green Bay Packers is what I'm trying to say here. This is something they've been doing. And I understand that there's bumps in the road right now, but these guys are going to grow together, and you talk about a sustainable way to build a team. This is also the way to do it. There's no one right way to do it. And this way has worked for the Green Bay Packers. So just have a little bit more patience, give it a little bit more time. I still think that the Green Bay Packers end up second in this division.
I think so too. And this is what we, as Packer fans, we signed up for. We knew that this was going to be the type of season that it was going to be with a young team, a bunch of dead salary cap. Devontae's gone 2 years ago. Aaron Rodgers is gone this year. Like, there's going to be a transition here. We're seeing that transition. We're seeing some good. We're seeing some bad. I think the peaks have been pretty high. The valleys, I think, have been maybe lower than maybe some have expected, but they're 500 team. They're right around even from a point differential standpoint. Yep. And overall, like, this is a team that is going to have more of these moments than less, but they're learning together on the fly. And I feel for Matt LaFleur. I know that, like, it's Brian Gutekunst's job to, like, look at this team and be like, all right, where can we be in 2024, 2025, 2026 and beyond? It's Matt LaFleur's job to go out and win this week. So, like, I'm sure he's like, yeah, I'd love a freaking veteran at one or two of these positions so that, we can go out and, maybe play at a little bit more discipline level. But these guys are going to be your veterans in 2, 3, 4 years. And that is an encouraging thought with some of the stuff that they're already doing on the field this year as rookies and first-year players.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the defense is one of those things too that needs to start playing up to the talent level that they have. And that's my one concern, I think, with the Packers right now is still that run defense, because that was their issue last year. And that hasn't gotten better. You need to get better.
It's my biggest concern going into the year.
Yeah, and I'm like, Jordan Love needs to have a defense that he can lean on at this point. The defense should not be leaning on him to keep scoring points, because he is young and he's still developing with his young receivers and all that other stuff. So I'm like, the offense is gonna be a little disjointed right now. You should be able to lean on this defense. And that's my concern still going forward, which isn't encouraging, because that means they've been stagnant since last year.
No, as excited as I am about, certain things with this team still, if they can't stop the run and they can't run the football, things are going to get worse before they get better. Because this is not the team that's built. Like, you don't have an MVP quarterback that can just cover some of those issues. Like, you've got to be able to do some of the basics and running the football and stopping the run. And right now, Green Bay's not doing either of those. Let's take a spin around the rest of the NFC North really quick. I know you had a great piece on Harrison Smith. He is once again playing out of his mind. The Vikings finally get a victory. It was a little bit touch and go for a while there. Didn't start great, but they get a win over the, now defeated 0-4 Carolina
Completely
Panthers.
Defeated. Yeah, the only other defeated team in the league other than the Bears.
I know, but they get the win.
They get the win. It was encouraging because it was finally kind of figuring out how to win those one-score games that they were so good at winning last year. It was not at all surprising that Harrison Smith was the first one to pop off, because what Brian Flores told me before this season was that this defense runs through Harrison Smith and Jordan Hicks. It runs through these vets. Brian Flores equips his players to essentially behave as an offense, where they can make checks, they can make audibles based on what they're seeing on the field. And he makes sure that there are at least two guys on every one of these defenses that knows everyone's job, knows the why behind every play call. That way they can look at an offense and say, okay, this is going to work or this isn't going to work. Let's check into something else. And Harrison Smith is one of those guys, because he's a veteran and he's someone that Brian Flores leans on to be his eyes on the field. So the fact that Harrison Smith is popping off now, I think you're going to see him. You're going to see Jordan Hicks. The fact that Danielle Hunter already has 5 sacks this year, Marcus Davenport is now getting back into the fold. You're going to see 1 by 1, 2 by 2, some of these guys really coming into this system as they really start to grasp it. And that's what I'm looking for going forward. Now they have a test against the Kansas City Chiefs coming up this weekend. But I'm looking for kind of that incremental improvement where you keep seeing different guys pop off. So you saw Harrison Smith last week. I'm going to be looking towards Jordan Hicks or one of those other 2 pass rushers. The fact that Brian Flores has maintained his creativity while still having blue chip pass rushers like Danielle Hunter and Marcus Davenport, I think is going to make this team really tough to contend with once they grasp this system, and they're going to be able to play some more complementary football that's going to win them these one-score games again.
Yeah, I do think this Vikings defense is going to continue to trend in the right direction. You had brought it up earlier this year, just like it's going to take a hot second to get everyone on the same page of this Brian Flores defense. I think we've seen that through the first 4 games, but as you mentioned, there were some signs this past game that, maybe they're starting to head in the right direction, and Harrison Smith has to be a big piece of that as one of the key veterans on that defense. So they get the win against Carolina. We'll see if that gets them trending in the right direction. They've got a really tough one this week against the Chiefs that we'll talk about in a little bit. That it felt like that Panthers was a must win with the Chiefs coming up right after it, but we'll talk about maybe some of the matchups there. But I do want to ask you about the train wreck of the division that is the Chicago Bears. You wrote, I think, a great piece of or at least a tweet, I forget which one it was, but are they ready to win? And I think that's a fair question to ask of this Bears team. They have the loss to the Broncos after being up, I think it was 28-7, and they just completely fall apart. There's questions about Matt Eberflus. You've got the Chase Claypool situation. He got peppered for, I don't know how many questions it was in a row about the Chase Claypool situation. It's a crazy, crazy, crazy team right now.
It's in the way that the Lions have absolutely everything figured out, both on the field and off of it. The Bears have nothing. They don't have an off the field culture to fall back on. They're not performing on the field. It's just they're finding new levels of dysfunction every week. And we saw Jaquan Brisker just got hurt with has a hamstring injury now after a half-speed practice leading up to the game Thursday night. Like nothing is sound. There's nothing that you can trust or build on. There's no foundation whatsoever to build from in Chicago right now, and they don't have their footing as a result. And it makes a lot of sense when you see the breakdowns in every which way. It will be very interesting to see. The Bears have never fired their coach in season in their 100 whatever year history. So they would buck over a century of tradition and history if they were to fire Matt Eberflus at any point during this season. So for that reason, barring anything egregious happening, I don't think that poor play on the field, unfortunately, is enough for the McCaskies to make a change or for Ryan Poles to make a change at this point. Also, I don't know who would come in and be the acting head coach. You could get Richard Hightower, their special teams coordinator, is the only one on this staff with coordinator experience. None of these guys have been coordinators before. None of them have been head coaches before. So I don't know who you feel good about leaving the team to if Matt Eberflus departs. I don't know. Like, firing your offensive coordinator for the same reason just doesn't make a whole lot of sense either, unless you have an immediate replacement for him. Yeah. But there doesn't seem to be a way up. Like the Bears don't know which way is the surface, and they're drowning. And honestly, it sucks. Like I hate having to talk about how much this organization has failed because, and I think Packers fans can appreciate this, like that rivalry is at its best when both teams are at their best. And you want good competition and you want these amazing games and all this other stuff. Like steamrolling a team all the time it gets boring and old after a while. And also the Chicago fan base is so passionate, and I think they're forced to talk themselves into just ridiculously unrealistic situations. They can't see the forest through the trees because they're trying to grasp at absolutely everything. And I don't blame them for it. But I don't even know where to begin I see all these articles of like what I would do to fix the Bears. I'm like, I don't know what I would do to fix the Bears. There's so much wrong with them right now. You can't do anything in season either that's really super meaningful when you have organizational failure at every single level right now.
Well, it's so hard in the NFL when you've got 17 games. That's all you're guaranteed. And, the Bears have had obviously issues for a while now, but a lot of times you get you at least maybe get a new head coach and there's a little bit of new optimism, or you get a new quarterback and there's a little bit of new optimism. And at least maybe the season isn't an unmitigated nightmare until like week 9 or 10. And you're like, all right, well, now it's over and there's like 7 weeks left. This was over by week 3, and it might have been over by the time they lost to the Packers. Like that's almost like what it felt like after that game. But like at least by like week 3, that everything was already falling apart to the point where you're like, all right, same old Chicago Bears. And to your point, this league, and I'll put the Packers in there too. There's certain teams where this league is better when certain teams are good, and the Chicago Bears are generally one of those teams where it just makes it a little bit more entertaining. We haven't seen that level of play from Chicago. Now, from a Packer fan standpoint, there's certainly some things entertaining about watching what's going on as well. But yeah, it's sometimes, but still, you want to see teams beat the best teams, and you want to see a little bit more competence and those sort of things. It's going to be so interesting because, to your point, all right, so if they fire Luke Getsy, what are you gonna like? I don't think that's going to change anything. Like the defensive coordinator situation already happened.
He's already gone, right?
If you're going to fire the head coach, if you're not going to go with Getsy, everyone wants him fired already. Like I don't know where you go in season. I joked earlier this week, do you give Jeff Saturday a call? That worked out well for the Indianapolis Colts last year, but like there's no good answer. And to your point, for anyone that wants to put out a blog, a podcast, an article, or anything else on how to fix the Bears, good luck, because there are a lot of things.
More power to you.
Is that like, it does feel like if they have one thing going for them right now, they have right now the number 1 and number 2 picks in the NFL draft next year. And it does feel like for maybe the first time, they have the ability to completely clean slate this thing and go new GM, new head coach, new quarterback, if they would get Caleb Williams all at the same time. Not that you have this quarterback on one timeline that was drafted by a GM that's no longer here, that was hired by a coach, and everyone's like, well, whose quarterback and GM and coach is this and whose fault? And you get the Spider-Man pointing meme of, well, it's everyone else. It's like, just get everyone on the same timeline and start it from scratch and see what they can do together. And that this might be their one opportunity to actually do that.
Yeah, and I'm honestly not sure that they're going to do that either, just because of the fact that not only do they not have a history of firing coaches in season, they don't have a history of firing coaches with multiple years left on their contracts, or GMs for that matter. They don't want to pay coaches that aren't coaching for them. And listen, I get no team wants to do that, but everyone pretty much does it at some point or another. And I just there's no good backup plan. There's no good there's no good place to turn right now. And it's really disheartening because, like you said, it happened so early in the season. And I don't think we're done either. I don't think that the defensive coordinator situation is entirely resolved. I see that maybe coming back to bite them later on in the season or whenever the full story ends up coming out. There's nothing good on the horizon for the Chicago Bears right now. I mean, you're coming up now on almost a year of not winning a game. And that is just, you're on the wrong side of these milestones. You have the bad milestones. You're on the wrong side of history for so much, so early in the season. And I really just sympathize, honestly, with everybody even inside that building. That's just like that. They don't know which way is up. And I don't know. It's going to be really interesting how they go forward. Cause I'm like, can the NFL grant them like a mercy exemption? Can they just like not play the rest of this season? Just like take picks 1 and 2 and just quit for right now? Cause I don't know. I mean, obviously that's not a thing, but putting everybody through.
That Panthers-Lions game is a sneaky important one in the NFC North because for like any other NFC North team, well, I guess in this case, just the Vikings and the Packers, but like getting the Lions a loss in the division would give the Vikings and Packers at least some hope. Whereas like you want the Panthers to pick up some wins so that they don't give the Bears a earlier draft pick. So it's like, man, I don't think it's going to happen, but if the Panthers could beat the Lions, that would be a sneaky, nice victory for at least the Vikings and the Packers side of things. But we got to probably get out of here pretty quick here. I know you're super busy. We're recording this on Thursday prior to Bears Commanders. It'll launch on Friday, but we got 4 NFC North games this week: Bears at Commanders, Chiefs at Vikings, which we hinted at a little bit earlier, Panthers at Lions, which we just talked about, and then Packers at Raiders. Just your quick thoughts on the slate of games for the NFC North this week.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to see. I'm taking the Commanders for Thursday night. That could age bad, but you know what? I'd be happy to be wrong. As far as the Chiefs Vikings, again, we're talking about how the Vikings defense is gaining some momentum, and they're running straight into one of the offensive juggernauts in this league. Though Kansas City has some trepidation about their young wide receivers. That's been a storyline kind of going around, not being totally on the same page with Patrick Mahomes. I'm really looking. So Brian Flores owns an over 60% blitz rate through the season. He blitzed Justin Herbert 81.6% of dropbacks when they played Minnesota or when they played the Chargers. And he can't keep that up against Pat Mahomes because he's so good against the blitz. So I'm going to be very interested to see Minnesota's game plan when it comes to defending Patrick Mahomes. But then again, Patrick Mahomes doesn't have the guys he doesn't have the receivers that know him like the back of their hand. So that's what makes him so dangerous usually, is he can make something happen after the play breaks down. I don't know that he has that ability as much right now, so we'll see. Lions, Panthers, you said the most interesting storyline for half the NFC North right now, because if the Lions win, that puts them further ahead of the division, but it helps the Chicago Bears in that the Panthers stay winless and keep that number 2 pick, especially if the Bears stay winless. But yeah, I mean, if the Panthers somehow pull it out, it really helps the Packers and the Vikings in a lot of ways. But and then I'm just excited to see, the Packers I feel like this is kind of a get right game on Monday night. I think that they have a really good shot against the Raiders. The Raiders are not without their dysfunction this year, and in a national spotlight, I think it's so impressive too that Jordan Love just has no panic in him. And when he's put on these primetime games, like, he still makes things happen, even if it doesn't end up in a win like it did this last Thursday night. But you see him still fight and come back and and flash some really good things. So maybe flashing more good things against the Raiders, which I think is a totally winnable game for the Packers.
I did too. I think it's a get right game as well. They're coming off the rest. We talked about, we'll see if it's almost like home field advantage for Green Bay with the amount of Packer fans that will be there. I like a lot of things about that game for Green Bay. I'm going chalk this week. I think Packers over Raiders, Lions over Panthers, Chiefs over Vikings, and Commanders over Bears. I think kind of the favorites in each of those games find ways to pull out the victories. I don't know if I had to pick an upset, I'm not sure which way I would go. Probably, maybe you go Raiders. I don't know. Like, just because weird things could happen. Maybe Vikings could pull off the Chiefs. I don't know.
I think if I'm getting frisky and trying to pick an upset, I think I guess I'm going Vikings over Chiefs rather than Bears over Commanders. Good God. How far we've fallen.
It feels like all the favorites find a way to win in this one, but that's of course why they play the games. We will have the opportunity to break it all down next week and see what we were right about, what we were wrong about, and everything in between. Carmen, tell everyone where they can find your amazing work over on Fox Sports and where we can find you on social media.
Yeah, foxsports.com. I've got even a little tab that if you just click on my name, it pops up all the articles I write. And then Carmi B on, like you said at the top of the show, and we'll end the show with this. Carmi B is where you can find everything that I do on a consistent basis. I always repost my appearances or articles or anything like that. So on Twitter, Instagram, even TikTok. But my TikTok isn't really newsy. It's just what life is like on the road and behind the scenes a little bit more. So I don't know if you're into that, but go for it. Check it out.
Follow her on all forms of social media at Carmi V. You won't regret it. She does an amazing job covering the NFL and, of course, the NFC North. You'll find her here next week on the Pack a Day podcast as well. You can follow me at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. That's going to do it for us today. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.